This is Linux in Laws, a podcast on topics around free and open source software, any associated contraband, communism, the revolution in general, and whatever else fancies your tickle. Please note that this and other episodes may contain strong language, offensive humor, and other certainly not politically correct language. You have been warned. Our parents insisted on this disclaimer. Happy, Mum? Thus, the content is not suitable for consumption in the workplace, especially when played back on a speaker in an open plan office or similar environments. Any minors under the age of 35, or any pets, including fluffy little killer bunnies, your trusted guide dog, unless on speed, and cute T-Rexes or other associated dinosaurs.
This is Linux In-Laws, Season 1, Episode 76. Chris, how are things?
Can't complain. What about you, Martin? It's sunny down here in northern Frankfurt. We just clocked in at not 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but rather 85 degrees Fahrenheit today in Frankfurt. We're recording this October 2022, I think. Otherwise, I reckon it's great.
Sounds very pleasant. Can't complain myself. I had a nice discovery after the weekend.
Excellent.
Some a friend of mine came over and he left me this USB stick with 10 Bitcoin. It was very kind of him. I didn't really expect it, but that was. I'm joking.
Brilliant. I thought it was 20. They were wrong.
Anyway.
Yeah, full disclosure, Martin and myself had a working weekend where we fleshed out the path to world domination after all. And of course, Bitcoin played a very important role in that strategy. But this is not about us, but rather about open source topic, and we are happy to introduce, or rather to welcome, a user of open source for the last couple of decades. Brian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey guys, thanks for the invite. Appreciate it. Glad to spend the next hour or so with you guys. And I've known Chris for some time. We worked together at some other companies, past life, and I've been in technology for way many decades. I guess I originally cut my teeth on SCO Xenix, if I remember. So, I mean, that will obviously date me. A lot of hands-on technology work over the decades. What I've been doing most recently, though, is kind of in management roles at this part of my career. And obviously, open source is something, whether or not people know it, they're using it in any situations. So I have been a lot of different verticals, a lot of different industries on both sides of the fence, being, selling that stuff, deploying that stuff, versus then trying to work on the other side of the fence where, we're living with these decisions we made. So just a lot of experience, broad field of vision at this point. And where am I? We have good weather, but unlike Chris and Martin, it's still kind of early morning for me because I'm on the west coast of California, just kind of around the San Francisco Bay Area.
And of course, Brian is just a little bit modest. He has a vast, comprehensive experience, and that's exactly, especially in the era of open source, I reckon. And that's exactly why we invited him to the show, because the idea is basically for the next almost hour, I reckon, to get a user's perspective of open source and probably also the challenges that are associated with that realm on the show. So, Brian, why don't we get started with maybe how you came across open source initially?
Well, I
in
guess
your career.
Sure. Yeah, initially, let's even say the open source model was working really well once the internet opened up, right? Like I said, when we had the SCO Xenix, all those, hundreds of years ago, IP networks were not even in vogue. We used to get the muxes with their serial port stuff, and everything was really locked in. Everything was crazy expensive, crazy buggy was a big part of the issue, right? Everything was broken and you had to crawl on your hands and knees to go back to the vendor to get it fixed. And that's just the way it was. then as IP networks started opening up and people get stuff, even when it was something silly like, the dial-up, or even if you were lucky to get just, 10 megs in your office, you could start downloading new software pretty much from anywhere and then start playing and learning it. So it just opened up the world tremendously. And maybe the features and functions weren't there in the very beginning. And that was okay, because at least you could play with something else. Fast forward really, really quickly, then the communities that were using it, they really strengthened it past the incumbent vendors. So really, really good. You could then push on your vendors, right? You could influence their roadmap saying, hey, if these people who are sitting home just jamming out this code, playing with stuff, being transparent, if they can do it, why am I paying you so much money and you're behind the times? So that was a really good wedge to start doing something. So that was really fun.
Any particular type of open source software you started using for first? Like, or something else, right?
Yeah, the big one in the beginning was, against one of the evil empires of Oracle. Right? So a lot, right? Because it was like, wait a second.
Evil, not sure what you mean.
They're running a business, but they're so brutal, right? In their revenue cycles, right? So it's like, it's basically, they're holding you hostage. So that kind of broke a lot of things out of the, away from them. So kind of working with that quite a bit. Then even after that, right? So that's at a much lower level, right? But then even after that, I used to work with this one proprietary language, if I go back like way, way, way back ago, and it was called, I don't know, even know if you could look it up anymore, right? There was a thing called IDXL, Intelligent Data Exchange Language, right? And, we had to pay for that, kind of a king's ransom. And it was very primitive though, but it was really kind of like a precursor. I'm going to imagine even before like Perl was really out there. So you could really start playing with this stuff. It was expensive. That company was a little startup a long, long time ago out of the East Coast. And they were basically plugins on top of Oracle. Very primitive, moderately expensive. They wrote it, they iterated on it really, really fast. But then it all became so much more, like with Perl, right? And then with Python, kind of running through that kind of stuff. So it just gets people to really understand it really, really well. And then what's really fun about it, right? They're teaching all the open source stuff in school right now. My son's getting some, advanced degrees and stuff like that. And no matter what you want to do, the data science element of that is just huge, right? So then with all the Python, all the pandas, right? Everything out there is just really great. But software is software. And then these people want to consume it, but also like the community training to support that is so open. That's what I think is really, really cool about it. They can then analyze it. It's no longer under lock and key. So that transparency, that sense of community, that sense of sharing just helps everybody. So it just kind of works out pretty well at this point.
You obviously picked up on some of the main factors there about open source software. Just curious about the school bit. I think you're presumably referring to when you mentioned data science, things like PyTorch, etc. But I don't know about the schools in the US, but over here, most schools are still teaching people to use Microsoft products, right? In the the lower schools, which is something that is obviously helps their control of that kind of market. But is that the same over there?
Oh no, it was actually very different.
Okay.
So without giving too many personal details, right? So and they were one of these data science classes. A kid with the advanced degree. I was like, let me see your computer science homework. Come on, like he's
yeah.
And then really what it was like, ooh, wow, using a Python, and it's getting exposure to like Jupyter and the notebooks and pandas and all that great stuff. Mm-hmm. So they're really teaching them how to run it like inside of there, which is really kind of cool. So they didn't have to go through all the stuff like, how do I set up my laptop with, setting up, everything else you need to set up on it, right? You gotta, you guys know, right? Setting up your laptop could be kind of a challenge if you're not like into that level. So they got these interfaces and they get right into the programming paradigms. And the beauty of it is it's not Microsoft, meaning, Microsoft is great for a lot of things it does. But, the open source just gives you so much more with so much transparency. And I even think more importantly, right, it's life, right? Things break, things fail. Why do I have to call up a 1-800 support number? Somebody's probably run across that. So yeah, learning how to use all those sites where people are helping each other is really, really fun, right? And so it teaches them to collaborate. So it's not just, it's actually
just using it. You're actually also needing to interface with the community. Yeah. Very nice, very nice. And the project that you mentioned, they're all open source as well, right? It's
right.
Just an example of what can be done.
Yeah. Now the challenges in this part of my career, I've worked in pharmaceuticals a long, long time ago when I used to say, oh my God, they have more money than God, right? Their money was pouring in, right? And then healthcare kind of pivoted a little bit, pivoted a lot, especially at that level. So they kind of like lowered the drawbridge. But they had big development communities, right? They were funded so well, they could spend so much. And that's kind of where I cut my teeth initially. We just got to play with a lot of this stuff. And that was really good. Then I worked in other organizations. I would kind of come in like, hey, you're the brain on a stick, right? We need a contractor, a consultant, somebody who comes in and knows this. And, let's be honest, right? A lot of times when you're good, the reason you take a contract job is to bypass internal equity, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to make at least twice as much as the employee sitting right next to me because I'm going to deliver like crazy. So, done a lot of that, especially in the development community. So I've worked in finance quite a bit. Said the pharmaceuticals quite a bit. So many different verticals that I've worked in. And they've always had some semblance of a development community. And the developers are out there playing, they're tweaking stuff. The one thing that's really interesting about where I'm at right now for about the past year and a half. So where I am right now, it's well-funded, small series of community hospitals and clinics, right? They're doing emergency rooms, operating rooms, respiratory therapy. It's the place you go and you get really sick with COVID. It's not a teaching hospital, right? So they have some research there, but not much. They're a well-funded community hospital that does really well in Silicon Valley. So they really don't have big funding issues. But this is the first place I've ever worked at, and I can say this unilaterally, first place I've ever worked at that has absolutely no developers. So I'm like, how do they get by? And it's interesting with the open source, just looking at from a risk perspective, a funding perspective, they need a throat to choke perspective. It's a very interesting industry. Now, I'm sure they use much more open source and have a lot of developers in research facilities. I know in particular, UCSF, world-class institution, without a doubt, crazy well-funded, crazy smart people there, crazy research going on, obviously a lot of clinical stuff. They got taken down by... Oh,
Sorry, Brian.
Yes.
UCSF standing for University of California at San Francisco?
Correct, yes.
Sorry, for those two listeners in the audience that do not know that acronym, sorry.
Yep. World class, incredibly well funded.
Yes.
Yeah, and then so they had a lot of smart people, right? On the clinical side, where you're doing delivery of, what doctors, nurses, pharmacists need, a lot of that's not open source because it has to be so locked down, so well vetted for a bunch of reasons. But when you bring the open source stuff in, it does create a lot of security risks. And I know in particular UCSF, they got hit with a modest ransomware attack. I'm going to say this was about maybe 2.5 years ago. And it came in through one of their research labs, right? So, and I remember hearing the negotiations. They released the negotiations with the people who are holding a ransomware. So you have these people doing research. They want to iterate on their tools real fast. They essentially become their own shadow IT organization. They can right-click, download anything they want, and in there becomes the problem. The UCSF ransomware piece was the bad bytes came in through the research lab. And then it was able to infect a couple other things. And then UCSF had to write a check and then went back to work, right? So with that, and also in this industry, especially in a clinical delivery, it gets really challenging because we are so highly regulated. And we're such this country is so so litigious, right? Everybody's looking to sue everybody else. And there are so many regulations. In this country, we have HIPAA, health information portability, something or other, right? We have to protect
Accountancy Act, I think.
Yeah, so we have HIPAA data, we have PHI data, and we are really cognizant of making sure people who shouldn't see that data don't see that data. So
PHI, of course, standing for personal health information, if I'm not completely mistaken, for those people who are not familiar with the acronyms.
Correct. So we're really working into that. Yeah, it's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. That's HIPAA. And then PHI, I believe, is like private healthcare information. Mm-hmm. And so we're in the United States, have to deal with HIPAA and PHI, right? Fully support that. Then inside the United States is California. So then they have all their extra layers of protection on top of that. And then so you take one little step sideways and they can literally shut you down, right? You violate that stuff, they will either, so compliance is a big thing they take serious. So with that also means, the open source model, it's hard to get one throat to choke. Let's even take something, relatively simple. I think it was just earlier this calendar year, maybe it was like December or January, the whole, Log4j fiasco, right? So I believe, Log4j came in through stuff that was written on open source, and then our other vendors are writing all their wares on top of it. So we don't have, first of all, we have literally hundreds of applications that do everything. Some of them are big, like EMR, electronic medical records. In the United States, there's basically two main providers of EMR systems, right? And they're huge, right? Yes, they build an open source, but then they build it and they're accountable for everything. So they manage it. So the open source component is not something I have to worry about. I have to manage my vendor and not the code. So that's what makes it really, really different over here. So you have to kind of watch out for all the CVEs, whatever else is going on, zero-day exploits. So we watch that. But again, we don't have our own development team. But what we do have is really good policies, procedures, proof of controls for how we manage our internal infrastructure, for how we do lifecycle management of applications. And then we have a really world-class security team who keeps on iterating and building more. And they also use some vendors to help them out to make sure there's no blind spots. So the defensive posture that we take is huge, and it's expensive for all those reasons I just mentioned. We don't want data leaking out. Like I have a personal folder over here on my laptop, and it's just called Another Data Breach. And for all the stuff I get is, oh, we're sorry, your data's been lost over here. It's like it happens all the time. In healthcare delivery, even clinical research, right? You simply cannot let that happen. So the threshold is really, really high, right? And at this role I've got right now, I'm managing the infrastructure for the hospital and everything else that entails. We're on-prem, we've got DR offsite, we're in a couple of different clouds, we're moving to all that stuff. I'm the guy who's supposed to keep the bits flowing, but I do deal with the cyber teams on a daily basis, the compliance teams on a weekly basis, just to make sure we have all those controls. So because of that, really my point is there's a lot of open source. We know it's there. We just don't manage it at this point. We don't manage it. We have our vendors manage it. Because also developers, if you're going to have somebody come in and take care of it, developers come and go. And you always have to have somebody who's accountable for we need to patch this, we need to change that. So between the functionality that's required to make it work, the security, the workflow, it's very, very expensive. And it's also hard to innovate in this space. I think that's where the biggest challenge is, right? How do you take, so in the United States, I'm a taxpayer. I pay way too much. I think the government wastes money. They're not effective. And then
I think that's not any different in any other country, to be honest. But most people probably have that view about tax.
But then I add on top of that, the amount of money that we pay in this country for healthcare is out of control. And I'm okay with paying money, right? But I think the value proposition is very much lost, right? So there's where I think the challenge is, right? You've got all that value, all that intellectual property, all that community vetting inside of the open source. We're afraid to use it. There's a lot of savings inside of there. And back in the United States, we've got the most expensive healthcare in a developed world, right? Cool. We have the worst performing metrics of healthcare in all the developed nations. So we're paying a ton. We're not getting the value returned on that. And part of it's the reasons I just mentioned. There's other things that are going on. The government steps in, people are smoking too much, people are drinking too much. But I think that's everywhere. But then how come we can't solve these problems using software? And I think part of the challenge that we've seen too is we've had big companies come in too inside the industry. Google's come in, Microsoft has come in, IBM's come in, right? Their Watson thing in their healthcare. There's some really smart people there. They find it hard to be in the industry also, right? It's just hard.
Yeah. So I just wanted to follow up on a couple of things. You mentioned how account software solve this problem about people looking after their health, for example, right? But the fact is that I don't know how much you know about the UK, but the reason why, one of the reasons why smoking isn't banned altogether is because the taxes on this fund a large amount of money towards the healthcare to go for it. So in a way, let's say the smokers are funding the healthcare to a large degree, if we put it that way. So it's kind of I find it's an economic decision to do that, but the technology is there, right? Clearly, you could this, but then there's the freedom of choice scenario and stuff like that. Sorry, another thing I want to follow up on is you mentioned you use vendors for your to manage your open source software or manage. Is that vendors on the level of let's say you pick a technology, Red Hat, for example, or Postgres is supported, or is it at a different level that you're?
So the way they're managing it at this point is EMR.
Sorry, Brian. You can use other open source software. It doesn't have to be Postgres. Just squeeze that in.
Okay.
I'm sure you don't use any Reddit or Rust over there.
That's right.
Sorry, Brian. Just go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No Reddit, unfortunately. Not yet. Sorry, Chris. Yeah. So there's two major EMR is the big thing, right? Electronic medical records. And in the United States, there's basically two main players who do that. And we know they built a lot of the stack on top of open source, right? Like, why wouldn't they? But they also use, it's kind of a mix of open source and then proprietary software. So, they kind of mix it. It's on them and we're really just paying them for functionality. And they iterate every quarter. They're doing major functional releases, and the functional releases are, it's kind of different, right? It's like, how do we discharge a patient and make it seamless and make sure they get all their papers, and even things that are getting printed are secure because it's theirs, right? And if somebody loses that paper at the printer, how do we make sure there's no PHI on it? Like really complex scenarios, and they work it through. So they do end up having that. What is interesting about the open source in healthcare, though, that I've seen, there are quite a few open source initiatives. And again, all these views are completely my own, so I could be off base here. They don't represent anybody I work with, anybody I hang out with, right? They're all mine, just to be clear on that. But then when I look at the list of open source healthcare software, what I kind of look at is there's a couple of really good initiatives out there, but really what they're for, it's an economic issue, right? They're really being developed for not developed countries. Like the UN's coming in and says, oh, okay, we know one of these countries that aren't as fortunate as ours, they have open source initiatives to at least get some semblance of technology to help with healthcare in third world countries. So it seems and what they'll do with that is, they're not going to worry about all the regulations, I assume. So there is a lot of good open source health related software. Some of it's for clinical use, clinical research. Some of it's for, actually delivering what the patients need. But it's not in the developed world. And I don't know why. I just don't. Cost, value propositions, I don't know. And I think that's the big challenge, right? How do you, again, this be the second time I've said it because I think it's so important. How do you get that open source model? How do you get that quick iteration of trying stuff out while making the clinical experience better and frictionless and more secure? Right? How do you do that? I think that's the big challenge. Oh, and then when you do it, here's the other thing, right? Let's say you built the proverbial better mousetrap. The return on investment here, it's interesting because our government in this country, we've got this like Medicare, Medicaid stuff. We're dealing, same thing you guys are dealing, hey, thanks for the COVID relief, right? Awesome. But now we've got our hangover, right? Part of it is, inflation. And inflation, I think, is running about like 8% here, right?
It's global, actually.
It's global, yeah. And then the government has come in because they're a big payer. And as of the last I heard, about 2 weeks ago, even though our cost has gone up by 8%, we have supply chain issues. Everything else that we've got going on, the government said, oh, we're going to give you a 2% raise on your medical coverage. So it's like, where's the incentive? Like, where's the incentive to innovate? They're like, we're going to pay you less per person. And so you have to kind of crank out the volume of people that you're trying to help in order just to make the same amount of money that you made last year. So it's that capital investment, right? It's that capital and training investment, right? So that's the financial side of it. So there's that challenge. Like, so how do you do that, right? Better, faster, cheaper, right? How do you do that? The other side of the coin is then when you change something in the clinical world, the healthcare providers, you don't even want to move an icon on their desktop. You don't even want to have a form that's going to have a different flow because these are really smart people, but you want to talk about people who are stressed. They don't have time to figure that out. You and I might go, oh, look, it's time to upgrade our operating system. Let's go take 20 minutes and then we're going to have to kind of maybe, play with it for an hour and say, hey, it works, right? Folks like you and I like doing that, like diving into technology. Hey, it doesn't work. Let's go make it work, right? And then we'll iterate, make it better. They have no time to even think about that. It's like, I've been doing it like this for years because they need to spend less time with the technology, not more. They need to spend more time with the clients, the sick people. So those are challenges, right? And so like, how do you take the open source and help them to iterate better, faster, cheaper, quicker, frictionless, right? There's a challenge in that, and there's a big opportunity. Yeah, so I can define a problem. I just don't have a solution to it yet.
All very interesting, Brian. Thanks for the insight. Going back to the security thing just a little bit, because this is kind of close to my heart. How do you see communities / organizations such as the OpenSSF, as in the Open Software Security Security Foundation? I think, yeah, Open Source Security Foundation, exactly. As in the recent establishment as a subsidiary of the Linux Foundation, to be relevant, be present in your daily work. As in, what level of influence or support, rather, do you see coming from this?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a lot more transparency in what they are chartered to do, right? And I know with the security stuff, we have a lot of really good companies that we use to scan us, to tell us what's going on, prioritize the fixes. But how do you get ahead of that and try to engineer those things out from the beginning? I don't know. It would be nice to be proactive and not reactive, right? We're in a completely reactive world. The proverbial horse is left the barn. Somebody stole it. How do you get ahead of that? It's really complex, and I think a lot of it too is just with look at that putty hack, right? Like putty should be like very, very simple. Like with that putty hack that happened from that group that what Microsoft's calling them Lazarus, right? Like putty uses a way to get inside your network and destroy assets. I mean, it's wild. But there's so many vectors coming in.
Putty, I reckon, being the Windows compatible or rather Windows-based SSH client, I suppose.
Correct, right. That's been around forever.
Yeah, almost, exactly.
Yeah.
Older than I am, that's a lot.
Yeah. And then the other one, right, was that malware chaos, right? That Linux-based thing that Black Lotus Labs found, right? It goes in, and it explicitly is targeting free BSD. Like, how do you get ahead of that? Like, how do you prevent that from happening? That's where I think the big move needs to be. Like, again, right? I'll define the problems. When I was younger, it was great. It was like, I can define a problem. I'll give you 3 solutions. Pick one. But the world has gotten much more complex. I'm really good at defining problems and then just going, okay, see you tomorrow. But there's a lot of opportunity in that. There's a lot of opportunity.
Talking about problems and changing the subject a little bit. Having researched healthcare is a big topic, right? There's lots of different subdivisions of this or different parts to it. But when doing some research at lots of places, the main kind of feedback that you get is like, oh, we're not ready for, like you mentioned before, we could solve a lot with software, but we're actually still trying to decipher most of our handwritten notes and trying to sort of documentize this electronically. Is that the case? Have you seen that in your work, and how you see that changing in the short term, if at all?
Documenting things electronically?
Well, it's just a general, it's like, oh yeah, we don't really, we're really behind with, let's say, automating all our processes, right? It's lots of it is, we don't know what information we have on patients very well, and doctors handed a note and then they need to be collected in a folder still and stuff like that. It sounded like, or in lots of cases, it's not as streamlined as you think it may be. On the other side, obviously, in places like drug development and stuff, there is a lot of data science going on to make those processes better. But on the pure sort of hospital side, that's the feedback that I've heard many times.
Yeah, and I think because we have 2 main platforms of record in this country for EMR, right? I think that, and again, right, these are my views from being there. So we have this one thing, we have, it's called Epic, right? Epic is used very widely, and I believe its number one competitor, or maybe it's even superior to it, is called Cerner, right? So there was two different ways, and that's where all the EMR records generally are. So when you're in Epic, Epic was written by this lady who was clinical. Her name is Judy, and she really brings kind of like a nurse's perspective on this. So, what does that mean? It's empathetic for the patients and the customers, for the sick people, patients. So it's empathetic towards that. It really tries to go through a clean clinical workflow, because it's my understanding, she envisions people, having to interface with the computers and the patients at the same time. So work it through. So very, probably designed from the right principles, right? And the technology works really well also. And they give you full end-to-end support. They monitor everything, right? Then on the other side of that, you have Cerner. Cerner, it's my understanding, was written by a long time ago. We had to consolidate this, so it was written by a bunch of accountants, literally. They funded that. Oracle recently purchased Cerner, so it's really made to, hit the minimum hurdles, right? Share records, get the compliance, get the billing, get the patients in and out, right? So they do the same things. Now, I don't know how well those two systems even talk to each other.
I mean, that's a fair choice for Oracle, because Oracle is run by accountants anyway these days, I suppose. Just a joke on this side.
I think it has been for the last 20 years.
All right. No, so all right. I'll take the bait. Right. I did work for Oracle a long time ago.
So did Martin, by the way.
Yeah, and I worked for them because I said their technology. At that point, I was like, wow, they're going to kind of run a big part of the world. And I was like, but they're so hard to deal with. So let me go work for them for a bit. So
to date people, which version did you start with?
5.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I can beat that.
You started with 3, right?
No, that's 4.
Okay.
Only briefly.
But then I went there,
right?
Yeah, and then when I went there too, they were essentially, right, like, no tongue in cheek over here, right? Like, there were 2 organizations that you did not mess with in Oracle, right? One of them was legal, right, and they would were strongly supporting the revenue stream coming in, right? Your contracts and your payments, right, come after you if you're like a day late, $1 short. They come after you hard. So that legal money-making machine, right, paramount to them, very successful financially. And the other one was their developers, right? Their developers are treated like gold, right? They were so heads down and focused on what they were building. So yeah, and it was kind of cool, like living in this area. When I moved here about 30 years ago, I moved into the Bay Area. So I got to meet a lot of the developers who were, writing all that code, Forms 2.0 or 3.0, stuff like that, right? Writing, the kernel modules and stuff like that. So meeting those folks, right, was really interesting. But those are the 2 classes of people, right? Don't mess with their money and don't mess with their brain power. Everything else was up for grabs. But yeah, they bought them because they're, you're locked in revenue. So I think you do get tied in. But one of the things that they are working on, right? We do have a lot of providers that are out there, doctors who are on their own, and they integrate with these systems. So there are, there's APIs. So the other communities can connect to these other EMR infrastructure, which keeps track of everything, which is really good. So, on another note too, one of the other things that's a challenge, and I need to dig into this, is they have what they call their PACS systems, their radiological systems. So they were having some big performance issues when I first got there. I still don't fully understand the stack. I got to dig into it. But all the way stuff is digitally progressed over the years, all the images that are out there, machine learning, you got the AI, you've got these giant images, you're generating terabytes a day of images. Where's the better place for AI and machine learning, right? Is it through open source and a community, or is it through private development, right? If I had to flip a coin and say, pick one, bet who's paying drinks tonight, I would say, I'm going to go the open source community, right? It's definitely going to make it better. And I don't know how much they leverage it. There's a lot of challenges in there. There's a lot of data in there, a lot of abstract data because it's not columns and rows and stuff like that. So
yeah, I mean the image processing part has been well developed, right, in the AI scene, whether it's radiological images or other the machine is better at detecting cancer than experienced doctors, right, stuff like that. So it is a well developed field, but ideal for that actually.
And back to the digital records. Right. I do think people are looking at it like everybody used to bring a piece of paper in, right? It's like, ugh. But now it's like, oh, look, I can fill my stuff out on electronic form, right? That's not a digital record, right? To me, all right, it's stored in a database somewhere, right? So from that perspective, it's not paper, it's in a computer. But still, the real thing with the digital record should be, hey, I'm over here. You got my biometric data. Why are you asking me again what my middle name is? Why are you asking me for my phone number, my medical ID, right? Why do I have to keep just typing it into an electronic form instead of writing on a piece of paper? To me, that's not a digital record, right? The digital record should say, hey, I'll give you a retina scan. I'll give you a thumbprint scan. Maybe one other thing, and then we know who you are, right? To me, that's the way it really needs. And I think if you do that, you'll eliminate, you can help reduce fraud, right? Theft of, financial assets, theft of electronic records that you've got that identify you. So with the digital records, we have, I don't even think that that's really been touched. And that's huge. And I think people, unfortunately, go, oh, look, I have an electronic form. I don't have to fax you a piece of paper, right? So again, huge opportunity.
I reckon, Brian, we could go on about this for hours. But what would be a kind of concluding summary here with regards to where do you see the challenges apart from the ones you just mentioned and the road forward with regards to open source, especially in that medical environment that you have been describing and that you're working on right now?
To reduce the fear of the unknown and learn it. Right? The people who are being obstructionists about it, they need to be educated. And we need to get away from let's get litigious first, right? Because when you do that, people are afraid to move forward. That's one leg of it. But then also from an end user experience. I don't care what it is too, right? Even if you're in finance, right? From Amazon's done a great job of it, right? You want to buy something over there, it's frictionless. So how do you make all of this, frictionless for the end users who are essentially doing clinical delivery, right? So how do you do that? Right? I've worked in the finance industry and that's pretty easy. You can just bully people, and as long as you're making money, no one cares, right? No one cares. Here it's just a different world. And then the investment in development, it's just getting all 100% outsourced to vendors. So I think these agencies need to bring some of that in-house, govern it better, and then, the buy versus build thing, they need to balance that out better. Because right now it's just buy. And you really can't even negotiate on price that well. So I think if those two obstacles are managed properly, it could help move the needle forward, pun intended.
Interesting perspective, Brian, and thank you very much for that insight. That's food for thought indeed, let's put it this way. Brian, we have a special kind of end sequence with that show. It's called POCs of the Week, POCs as in Pick of the Week. In terms of, we mentioned something that we have come across within the last couple of weeks that is worth mentioning. Martin normally goes for Amish adult entertainment websites. I normally mention a book or movie or something like this, but jokes aside, anything goes, Brian. So what have you come across in the last 2 weeks or couple of weeks, let's put it this way, that you find worth mentioning. And as I said, anything goes, whether it's a movie, whether it's a coffee shop in the Bay Area, just go for it.
Oh, God. How are you guys going to get through winter without gas? We're going to sell you some gas and we're going to become rich.
Okay, so it's industry in the US, okay, fair enough.
Yeah. You know what I heard? Yeah, we're going to lift ourselves out of this because you guys don't have natural gas over there. And then I heard we've got so much. And then I did hear on these tankers, right? I heard this yesterday. On these tankers, look, how do you get, liquid natural gas, right? I didn't know when you fill up one of those tankers, right? It's at such a low temperature. When they turn it to a liquid, that's enough for, I think they said like 50, each tanker that comes across, it's 50,000 homes for a year could heat you guys up.
Okay.
So
slightly more than 50,000 people living here.
Oh yeah, but that's just one tanker. That's just one tanker, right? And then like you got to build. We don't have the infrastructure to do it at that scale at this point, right? So how do we build it? How do we build that infrastructure?
Build a very long pipeline. Yeah.
Yeah. Build on a pipeline. Yeah, that's it. And no smoking allowed. Or smoke. You can smoke.
Nice one. So it's a second Marshall Plan with regards to energy for Europe. Excellent. I like the idea.
Yeah. The Marshall Plan's starting again. Yeah, and I'm glad we're
Brilliant.
Yeah.
U.S. taxpayers, you heard it here first.
Yep.
Anyway, okay, Brian, thanks. Martin, what's your pox in light of this interesting development? Let's put it this way.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, maybe it should be how to build a pipeline over long distances. But, I haven't come across that book yet.
On the more serious side, Martin, anything worth mentioning?
Oh yes, I recently started reading a book called The Code Book.
Okay.
And it is about the science of secrecy from ancient Egypt to quantum cryptography. So a bit of a historical overview. So far, very
details. Exactly. Details may or not the show notes. On a similar fashion, on a similar point, I'm tempted to mention Lee Child. He is a UK-born but now US-based author. He's, unlike Martin's recommendation, not exactly on the heavy side of things, but rather he, for example, did a series of books called Jack Reacher. It's about an ex-military cop traveling the US and encountering various, for want of a better expression, adventures. As I said, it's probably not the most challenging literature.
Did you read the book first, or did you watch the series first?
Yes, of course. There's also a movie franchise by the same name with, what's his name again?
Who knows?
Not Christian Slater, but Tom Cruise, exactly.
The original, yes. There's a more recent one, right? Yeah.
There's also a TV series not with Tom Cruise, I might add, exactly. But needless to say, the books were there first. And although the adaptations are pretty good, I reckon, if you are into the more kind of detailed side of things, just go for books. As I said, it's more on the entertainment side than on the challenging literature variety. And with that, Brian, I would like to thank you for being on the show. That has been more than interesting.
Yeah, my pleasure, and try to stay warm this winter. And if you can,
thank you. Yes, we will.
And if you can't, buy our gas.
Exactly, because Martin will move to the UK. Thanks for that advice, Brian. Martin will move to Germany because, as we all know, Germany is in Europe these days, and so we have a better.
No. All the ships come to us first, so we're going to keep all the gas that comes from the US.
Okay, with that, people, thank you for listening, and and hope to see you soon. This is the Linux In-Laws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast is licensed under the latest version of the Creative Commons license, type Attribution Share Alike. Credits for the intro music go to Blue Sea Roosters for their song Solid Market, to Twin Flames for their piece called The Flow, used for the segment intros, and finally to Celestial Ground for their song Sweet Justice, used by the Dark Side. You find these and other ditties licensed under CC at Jamendo, a website dedicated to liberate the music industry from choking copyright legislation and other crap concepts.
You guys are coming in loud and clear.
Yeah, we spent about 30 years on perfecting that audio setup, give or take a few.
Well, yes. Well, the other thing that on a related topic, yes. So Chris came over, and on his way back, he tried to he took a boat back to Frankfurt for some reason. Don't know why, but anyway, on the way back, he dropped a few packages on the Welsh coast.
Did I know?
You did. So, any donations, send them to Chris because he's somewhat poorer at the moment.
I see. Maybe that was my double because I can't recall diverting my chosen path from the airport actually to a harbor, but that's beside the point.
Fair enough.